The Galactic Cooperative had a saying, old as the first star charts, and twice as stubborn. If it bleeds, it fears. If it fears, it negotiates. Voruk-san had lived by that saying for 43 cycles. As senior diplomatic attaché aboard the cruiser Endless Patience, he had watched empires bend their knees, watched warlords go pale at the sight of a Krath warship entering orbit, watched merchants triple their insurance premiums the moment his species filed a flight plan through their sector. The Krath were, by every measurable definition, the apex predators of known space, and Voruk-san was, by every measurable definition, extremely proud of that fact. He stood 7 feet tall on 4 digicrade legs, each one ending in pressure-sensitive claws capable of detecting seismic activity through ship plating. His torso was wrapped in overlapping scale plates, gray-green and thick as ceramic armor. His 3 eyes, set wide for panoramic threat detection, could shift between visible light, thermal, and electromagnetic spectrums in under half a second. His jaw was triple-hinged, his blood clotted in 4 seconds flat. He had once, for a diplomatic wager, punched through a reinforced wall panel aboard a Solkari vessel. They gave him the trade agreement he wanted. Nobody had asked for a rematch, so when High Command assigned the Endless Patience to investigate the newly contacted species designated Catalog Entry 7714G, Voruk-san expected the usual experience: arrive, flex, collect tribute, depart. He had not expected to be the one sweating. The briefing room smelled of recycled oxygen and the faint nervous musk his crew was desperately trying to suppress. 7 Krath officers sat around a table that could have doubled as a landing platform, and every single one of them was staring at the data slate in front of them with the expression usually reserved for proximity alarms. "Read it again," said Drevak, the ship's weapons officer. His voice was carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that meant he was not feeling neutral at all. Voruk-san read it again. Species, human. Origin world designation, Sol 3, also known as Earth. Classification, category pending reassessment. Surface gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. Atmospheric composition, nitrogen-oxygen mix with trace elements. Average surface temperature variable ranging from -89 to +56 degrees Celsius. Seasonal axial tilt of 23.5 degrees creates extreme temperature cycling across regions. Notable surface features: liquid water oceans covering 71% of surface area. Active tectonic plate movement. Frequent severe weather events including electrical storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, and cyclones. Active volcanic regions. Surface megafauna documented in excess of 600 distinct predator species. Prey species equipped with defensive adaptations including venomous secretions, crushing force, and hardened exoskeletal structures. He set the slate down. "Their home planet," said Lieutenant Feska, his intelligence officer, "has over 600 things on it that want to kill you." "More than 600, Voruk-san corrected. That was the count of megafauna predators alone. The smaller organisms were not included in that figure. Silence. "How," said Drevak slowly, "did anything survive on that planet long enough to develop spaceflight?" "That," said Voruk-san, picking up the slate again, "is what we are going to find out." The human vessel that rendezvoused with the Endless Patience 6 hours later was not impressive by any visual standard. It was a compact, angular thing, built with an almost aggressive practicality. No ornamentation, no sweeping aesthetic curves, just angles and armor plating, and a docking port that extended toward them with mechanical confidence. Voruk-san watched it on the bridge display and found himself noticing details he would not normally notice. The hull showed repair patches, old ones and new ones. The ship had been hit, and whoever flew it had simply fixed the damage and kept flying. There was something quietly unsettling about that. "They are hailing us," said Communications Officer Briva. Except, the face that appeared on the main screen was small. Voruk-san knew the data. He knew the humans were shorter than Krath by a significant margin, softer looking, bipedal with a completely unarmored exterior. But knowing data and seeing a face were different things. The human on screen had what the files described as a female presentation. Brown skin, dark eyes, short haircut, practical and close to her skull. She wore a uniform in deep blue with gold trim. She looked, to Voruk-san's threat assessment instincts, completely harmless. His threat assessment instincts had been built by 40 million years of evolution on a world where the apex predators made Krath look like domesticated pets. He made a note not to trust his threat assessment instincts on this one. "Senior Attaché Voruk-san," he said formally, leaning slightly forward. "Representing the Krath Cooperative Directorate aboard the cruiser Endless Patience, we are pleased to receive the emissaries of Earth." The human smiled. It was an expression the cultural briefing described as a social positive indicator. It showed teeth, small flat teeth, which the briefing noted were present in a species that had evolved from omnivores and had historically used those teeth to eat everything from roots to large mammals. "Captain Mira Voss," she said, U.S. Tenacious. "It is good to meet you, Attaché Voruksan. We have heard a great deal about the Krath." "As we have heard about humans," he replied. And that was true. In the 3 weeks since Earth had made first contact with the cooperative, the intelligence files had grown from a stub entry to a document so long that his intelligence officer had stopped sleeping. "Wonderful," said Mira Voss. "Then we can skip the part where we pretend not to know anything about each other and get straight to business." Voruksan blinked all 3 eyes in sequence. He was not used to that. Usually diplomacy had a ritual opening phase that took the better part of a standard day. It involved formal gift exchanges, declarations of peaceful intent, and a careful structured dance of language designed to establish relative dominance without anyone actually throwing a punch. He had the distinct feeling that Mira Voss had punched straight through the ritual without noticing it was there. "Agreed," he said. The formal meeting took place in the Endless Patience's diplomatic suite, which Voruksan had always been privately proud of. It was large enough to impress most species into a quietly deferential frame of mind. The ceiling was high. The table was long and polished. Everything in the room was specifically calibrated to communicate, without saying it out loud, that the Krath were very large and very powerful, and you should probably agree with them. The human delegation filed in. There were 4 of them. Mira Voss, a tall man introduced as Liaison Officer Tobias Renk, who had a permanent slight smile and watchful eyes. A compact, quiet woman named Dr. Sarah Okafor, who immediately began taking discreet notes on a small device. And a last member introduced simply as Sergeant Yusuf Dahl, who was described as security personnel. Sergeant Dahl looked around the diplomatic suite once, with the calm, systematic gaze of someone cataloging exits and threats and structural weaknesses, and then stood to one side with his hands clasped behind his back. He did not look threatening. He looked like a man who had decided not to be threatening right now, which was a different thing entirely. Voruksan's instincts twitched. "Before we begin," said Mira Voss, settling into her chair as if she had sat in much larger chairs than this and found them all equally unremarkable, "I want to say that we appreciate the cooperative's interest in establishing formal relations. We are aware of your reputation in this sector." "Our reputation," said Voruksan carefully, "is something we have worked very hard to build. I imagine you have." Her dark eyes were pleasant and completely unreadable. "A species that can survive the conditions of Kratha Prime does not get to the stars without considerable capability." Just so. He felt a small, familiar warmth. This was usually the part where the other party began glancing nervously at the size of his claws. Mira Voss did not glance at his claws. She looked him directly in the middle eye, which most species found instinctively difficult. "We have done a great deal of reading about the Krath," she said. "Your homeworld, your physiological adaptations, the pale conflict of 2200 cycles ago, which I understand established Krath territorial boundaries through." She paused delicately. "Decisive engagement. 37 battles," said Voruksan with some pride. "In 14 months. She nodded, as if he had said something mildly interesting. "We were curious about something, actually. The cooperative's documentation on your homeworld notes that Kratha Prime has a surface gravity of approximately 1.4 standard, atmospheric pressure about 1.2 standard, surface fauna catalogued at around 40 distinct predator species of significant size." "That is accurate. That is a genuinely impressive world," she said. "We have a great deal of respect for it." And then she folded her hands on the table with the air of someone about to ask a question they already knew the answer to. "Tobias, do you have the comparison file?" Tobias Renk placed a data tablet on the table and slid it toward Voruksan with the smooth ease of someone who had done this before and enjoyed doing it. Voruksan looked down. It was a comparative analysis, side by side, Kratha Prime versus Earth. He read it again. He became very aware that his claws were pressing, slightly harder than usual against the polished surface of the diplomatic table. Earth's gravity 1.0 standard, slightly lower than Kratha Prime, fine. Earth's atmospheric pressure 1.0 standard, fine. Earth's temperature range -89 to +56 Celsius, with an average habitable zone temperature of around 15 Celsius. Kratha Prime averaged 28 Celsius with a range of 0 to 45. Earth was colder and more variable, fine. Earth's documented predator species of significant size, 600 plus, Kratha Prime 40. Earth's documented venomous species, Over 3,000. Kratha Prime. 12. Earth's history of mass extinction events. 5 major ones, each wiping out the dominant species of the era, and somehow, inexplicably, leaving the ancestors of Mira Voss intact and more determined than ever. Earth's history of species-wide natural disasters, ongoing. Earth's evolutionary age of first proto-intelligent hominids, approximately 300,000 years ago. Time between first proto-intelligent hominids and spaceflight, 300,000 years. Krath equivalent, 1.4 million years. Voruksan set the tablet down with a care that he was very aware was slightly too precise, too controlled. The kind of care you use when you don't want anyone to notice that your hands are doing something involuntary. You developed spaceflight, he said, and his voice was admirably level. In 1/5 the time it took us. We were motivated, said Mira Voss pleasantly. By what? Everything on our planet that was trying to kill us, she said, in a tone that suggested this was perfectly obvious. Tobias Rank was doing something with his face that the cultural briefing probably had a name for. It looked like he was physically restraining a larger expression. We noticed, continued Mira Voss, that your diplomatic files classify the Krath as the cooperative's primary Deathworld species. We wanted to address that classification. Voruksan looked at her. We think it may need to be updated, she said. The dinner that followed was, by any measure, one of the most deeply informative experiences of Voruksan's career. He had eaten meals with dozens of species. He had shared food with beings who communicated through pheromone clouds, beings who consumed minerals and found the concept of protein-based nutrition somewhat exotic, beings who ate everything in one enormous weekly feeding and spent the rest of the time being faintly smug about it. He had never watched a species eat like this. Dr. Sarah Okafor ate quickly and efficiently, like someone who had learned not to linger over meals. Tobias Rank ate everything offered to him, which Voruksan noted because the Krath diplomatic menu included 3 dishes that previous species had politely declined on the grounds that the spice levels were physiologically incompatible with their digestive systems. Rank ate all 3. He did pause at the 3rd one to take a drink of water. Once. Then he kept going. Our species, Dr. Okafor explained, noticing Voruksan's expression, has a somewhat broad digestive tolerance. Living somewhere that might try to poison you at any moment does encourage adaptation. Your planet, said Drevak, who had been very quiet for most of the meal and was now leaning forward with the focused intensity of a weapons officer who had found something that genuinely interested him, has organisms that use chemical warfare as a primary survival strategy. Thousands of them, said Okafor cheerfully, and your species evolved in close proximity to these organisms. For millions of years, yes, and developed resistance. To most of them. Some are still quite effective. She considered this. We keep them in secure facilities and study them. Very interesting biochemistry. Drevak looked at Voruksan. Voruksan looked at Drevak. It was the look of 2 individuals who had both just understood something they had not previously understood. Sergeant Dahl, who had barely spoken all evening, chose this moment to enter the conversation. Your planet, he said, in a voice that was quiet and level and somehow made the room feel like it had gotten slightly smaller. Catalogued 600 large predator species. At last formal count, said Mira Voss. What did your ancestors do about them? There was a small pause. Mira Voss looked at Dahl. Something passed between them that Voruksan could not parse. Well, she said, they ate some of them. Sergeant Dahl nodded once, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Voruksan realized, sitting in his very large diplomatic suite on his very impressive warship, that the saying he had lived by for 43 cycles was wrong. If it bleeds, it fears. If it fears, it negotiates. The humans bled. That was well documented. He was no longer confident about the second part. He picked up his drink, took a long measured sip, and decided that part 2 of this conversation was going to require significantly more preparation than part 1. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when everyone present has simultaneously realized that their understanding of the universe was, at best, incomplete, and at worst, embarrassingly optimistic. Voruksan had heard that silence before. He had caused it, in fact, on numerous occasions. He had walked into rooms full of nervous diplomats and watched the quiet settle over them like a heavy fog the moment they registered the full scope of what they were dealing with. He had never been on the receiving end of it. He was on the receiving end of it now. The diplomatic dinner had concluded 3 hours ago. The human delegation had returned to the UES Tenacious with the relaxed, unhurried manner of people who had somewhere comfortable to be. Mira Voss had shaken his hand at the docking bay, a human gesture the cultural briefing described as a greeting and farewell ritual. and Vorok-san had noted with clinical precision that her grip was firm, dry, and absolutely without hesitation. No deference. No instinctive softening of pressure in the presence of a larger species. Just a hand, extended and withdrawn, and a pleasant smile that gave away nothing. Sergeant Dahl had nodded at him on the way out. That nod, for reasons Vorok-san was still processing, had bothered him more than anything else about the entire evening. Now he sat in his private office with Lieutenant Feska across the table from him, and a full intelligence report spread between them on the display surface, and he was doing something he had not done in a very long time. He was revising his assumptions. "Tell me," he said, "everything the cooperative's files got wrong." Feska, to her credit, did not hesitate. She had clearly been waiting for this conversation. "The initial classification," she said, pulling up the original catalog entry, "placed humans in the Category 3 bracket. Spacefaring, moderately advanced, low threat assessment based on physical profile. The physical profile assessment was done from long-range observation only, before any direct contact. And the person who wrote that assessment," said Vorok-san, "was looking at a bipedal, two-armed, unarmored species with no visible natural weapons and a gravity tolerance of 1.0 standard. Yes, and made the very reasonable conclusion that they were soft. Yes." Vorok-san looked at the ceiling. "Feska, what is the average lifespan of a large predator on Earth?" She checked her notes. "Variable. The largest apex predators, the ones at the top of the food chain, average around 20 to 30 standard years in the wild. Longer in controlled environments. The data is complicated because humans have significantly altered the predator populations on their planet over the last several thousand years. Altered how? Hunted them. For food, for territory, for materials, for population control." She paused. "Several species that were once the dominant predators of their regions are now extinct. Humans ended those bloodlines. A species called the woolly mammoth, for example. Massive, cold-adapted megafauna. Humans competed with them for resources and won." Vorok-san was quiet for a moment. "How long ago?" "Approximately 10,000 years before agriculture, before metalworking, before any of the technologies that put that ship in our docking range." She set the file down. "They did it with sharpened sticks and coordinated group strategy." The silence in the room had a different quality now. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a predator reconsidering the terrain. "The file also," continued Feska, because she was a thorough woman and thoroughness sometimes meant delivering uncomfortable information in complete doses, "contains a section on human conflict history. Internal conflict history. Wars fought between human factions, on their own planet, before they had contact with anyone else. How many? The major ones. Thousands of documented conflicts spanning recorded history. The file attempts to categorize them, but the sheer volume makes it difficult to present cleanly. The two most significant in the modern era were called World Wars. The first lasted 4 years and involved the majority of human nation-states. The second lasted 6 years, involved essentially the entire planet, and ended when humans developed and deployed a weapon that used nuclear fission to destroy 2 cities in a matter of seconds." Vorok-san did not say anything. "They built that weapon," said Feska quietly, "in approximately 3 years, under wartime conditions, starting from theoretical physics. 3 years. The cooperative's equivalent weapons development program had taken 80 cycles and required the combined research capacity of 4 species. And after the war," said Vorok-san, because he needed to follow this to its conclusion. "After the war, they stopped using the weapons against each other. Mostly, built them up in significant quantities as deterrents, and then, over the following decades, engaged in a sustained effort to reduce stockpiles through international agreements." She paused. "They spent approximately 45 years in a state the records describe as a Cold War, meaning 2 major factions maintained constant threat posture toward each other without direct engagement, and during this period they also managed to develop spaceflight, land on their moon, and begin constructing the infrastructure that eventually got them to us, while pointing nuclear weapons at each other." "While pointing nuclear weapons at each other?" "Yes." Vorok-san leaned back in his chair. It was a very strong chair. It had been built to support the weight and frame of a Krath in full stress posture. He was grateful for this, because right now he needed something solid. The communication request from the Tenacious came in the following morning, during what Vorok-san had privately designated as his recalibration period. He accepted it from his office. Mira Voss appeared on the screen. She was drinking something from a cylindrical container, a beverage the cultural briefing described as coffee, and she looked like someone who had slept well and was prepared for a productive day. "Attaché Vorok-san," she said. "I wanted to follow up on yesterday's meeting. We had some thoughts about next steps for the formal relationship framework. Of course, he said. But first, Captain Voss, I have a question I would appreciate you answering directly. She tilted her head slightly. Go ahead. Your species, he said, is aware of the Krath reputation in this sector. We are, and you are aware that every other species that has entered formal contact proceedings with the Krath has done so with considerable caution. We noticed that, yes. Something flickered in her expression. Not amusement, exactly. Something more considered. The Solkari diplomatic team sent us a message before we departed. They were very kind. They advised us to be, and I am quoting directly here, extremely respectful and non-confrontational at all times. And your response to that advice? We thanked them for it, she said, and then we sent Sergeant Dal. Voruk-san looked at her. She looked back. Captain Voss, he said, are you telling me that you deliberately sent your most visibly composed and threat-aware security officer to this meeting as a message? She took a sip of her coffee. I am telling you that Sergeant Dahl is our standard diplomatic security attachment, and that he always looks like that. He catalogued every structural weakness in my diplomatic suite within 40 seconds of entering the room. Yes, she said. He does that. It is a reflex. He does it in restaurants as well. His family finds it slightly exhausting at holidays. There was a pause. And then, because Voruk-san was a fair being and had not survived 43 cycles of diplomacy by being unable to recognize a well-played hand, he said, You were not intimidated. No, she said. You were never intimidated. We were respectful, she said carefully. There is a difference. You are a genuinely impressive species, attaché. Your homeworld, your physiology, your history, all of it is remarkable, and we mean that sincerely. We came here prepared to build a real relationship, not to perform deference. He studied her face, that completely unreadable, pleasantly open face. And if we had been hostile, he said, then we would have responded to hostility, she said, with the same calm tone she used for everything else. We have some experience with that. The joint tour of the Tenacious happened at Mira Voss's invitation, which Voruk-sen accepted partly out of diplomatic protocol and partly because Feska had looked at him with an expression that said, if you do not get me onto that ship, I will never forgive you. The Tenacious was not a large vessel. It was faster than it looked, the engineering officer explained, because humans had approached propulsion with the same problem-solving energy they applied to everything else, which was to say, enormous stubbornness, and a willingness to discard the conventional approach if it was not working fast enough. The crew was 34 individuals. Voruk-san had been on vessels with crew complements in the thousands. He had not expected a crew of 34 to make him feel outnumbered. And yet there was something about the way the humans moved through their own ship, fluid and unhurried and completely at home, that produced a sensation he did not immediately have a word for. He found a word for it on the lower deck, in what the crew called the mess hall. The mess hall had a wall. The wall had photographs on it. Not decorations exactly. Documentation. Dozens of images, some of them old enough that the format was faded and grainy, some of them recent and sharp. Landscape images, enormous mountain ranges, vast flat plains under dark storm skies, ocean swells large enough to bury the Tenacious several times over, a photograph of what the plaque beneath it identified as a volcanic eruption, the cloud of ash and superheated gas climbing so high that the curvature of the planet was visible beneath it, and alongside the landscapes, animals, a creature of enormous size that the label called a blue whale, photographed from below, its body stretching the full length of the image and beyond, a hunting cat mid-leap caught at the apex of a strike, all power and contained precision, something called a saltwater crocodile with a jaw span that made even Voruk-san quietly revise some numbers, a microscopic image of something labeled tardigrade, described in the caption below as virtually indestructible, capable of surviving vacuum, radiation, extreme pressure, and temperature ranges that would reduce most life to component molecules. What is this wall? He asked Tobias Renk, who had been assigned as his guide. We call it the home wall, said Renk. It's a tradition on long-haul vessels. Every crew member brings one image from Earth to add to it, something that reminds them why they are out here. Voruk-san looked at the wall for a long moment. That, he said, pointing to the volcanic eruption photograph. Ensign Park's contribution, said Renk. Her family lives near a volcanic range. She says she grew up watching that mountain and finds it comforting, calming, grounding. That sense that something permanent and powerful exists, and that you are part of a world that has endured a very long time. Voruk-san looked at the photograph of a volcanic eruption that would, on Kratha Prime, have qualified as a civilization-threatening event, described as comforting. Renk, he said. Yes. Does your species know what you are? Renk blinked. I am sorry? Does your species understand? Said Voruk-san, slowly and precisely. What the rest of the galaxy is going to think when they finish reading your files. Does your species have any concept of how you appear from the outside? Renk was quiet for a moment. He had that expression again, the one that was restraining something larger. We have some idea, he said. We have been told we are, quote, concerningly casual about things that frighten other species. Who told you that? The Sulcari ambassador. He said it in what I believe was intended as a warning, and your response. We thanked him and brought coffee to the next meeting. Renk paused. He enjoyed the coffee. We thought that was a good sign. Voruk-san's final meeting with Mira Voss took place in the Tenacious small observation room, a curved forward compartment with a wide viewport looking out into the black. They sat in chairs that were slightly too small for Voruk-san, and he did not mention this, and Mira Voss brought 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him with the easy hospitality of someone who had never once considered that it might be refused. He drank it. It was bitter and dark and had the quality of something that had decided it was going to be exactly what it was and apologized to nobody about it. He found he respected that. We will recommend to the cooperative, he said, that the human classification be revised. We would appreciate that, she said. The Category 3 designation is not appropriate. We have felt for some time that it was not quite accurate. You will likely be placed in a category that does not yet exist, he said, because the cooperative's current classification system was not designed with your particular profile in mind. She smiled. It was the first smile of the whole visit that reached her eyes fully. Not the controlled diplomatic smile, a real one. We are used to that, she said. He looked out the viewport. Stars. The same stars the Krath had been navigating for thousands of cycles. The same map they had used to build an empire of reputation and careful sustained intimidation. The same stars that Earth had looked up at from the bottom of an atmosphere full of things that wanted to eat them, and decided at some point in the deep past to go see for themselves. Captain Voss, he said. Attaché. The Pale Conflict, he said. 37 battles in 14 months. We ended a war that had gone on for 200 cycles. Every species in the sector renegotiated their standing agreements with us afterward. It established Krath as the preeminent military power in this region of the cooperative. I know, she said. We read the files. How long, he said, do you estimate a comparable conflict would take your species to conclude? She was quiet for a moment, not thinking about the answer, deciding whether to give it. That would depend, she said carefully, on whether we considered it to be an existential threat. And if you did, she looked out at the stars. Less than 14 months, she said. Voruk-san sat with that for a long, quiet beat. Outside the viewport, the stars held their ancient positions, utterly indifferent to the fact that the balance of things had just shifted, quietly and without ceremony, in a small observation room on a ship called the Tenacious. He finished his coffee. We are going to be very good allies, he said. Mira Voss looked at him, and this time the smile was not diplomatic, not controlled, not strategic. Yes, she said, we are. 3 weeks later, the cooperative's classification board received a formal recommendation from Senior Attaché Voruk-san, requesting the creation of an entirely new category designation. The request was accompanied by 400 pages of supporting documentation, a revised threat assessment framework, and a personal note from Voruk-san himself that read, in full, I have met the humans. Revise everything. I mean everything. The board took 6 months to respond. The humans in that same 6 months established trade agreements with 4 cooperative member species, introduced coffee to 3 of them, and were invited to sit on 2 different security councils. Sergeant Dahl attended both invitation ceremonies. He catalogued the exits at both of them, out of reflex.